Have you ever received a call from a stranger about a student loan you don't have or a parking ticket on a car that you don't even own? Well, you could have been targeted by a scam factory, an organization of criminals thousands of miles away in a so-called scam factory in Southeast Asia. Today on the show, my co-host Asma Khalid takes a look at the highly lucrative scam factories of Southeast Asia and how they're making billions of dollars by duping people all over the world. I'm Tristan Redman in Paris, and welcome to The Global Story on YouTube.
I'm Jonathan Head. I'm the BBC Southeast Asia correspondent. I've been the Southeast Asia correspondent for an awful lot of years. In total, I think I've been about 20 years. So, I've had a chance to try and get my sort of feet under the table of Southeast Asia and familiarize myself with what is a really diverse and often quite tricky to understand region.
Well, Jonathan, we have you on the show today because we want to talk about scam centers, a phenomenon that you've been following for years. And, well, I think we are all familiar with scams. I will say I've certainly been on the receiving end of receiving a good amount of, phone scams, voice text scams. We don't really know where they originate from. And we're going to explain throughout our conversation what exactly scam centers are. But first, Jonathan, my understanding is you are one of the few journalists who have actually visited a place which there is strong evidence to suggest is actually a scam city.
Yeah, there's no question it is a scam city, although the people running it were denying that, and they would never have let us in if they didn't think they could have got that point across. We went to a place called Shwekoku. It is the most bizarre place. I mean, the whole time I was there, I was kind of shaking my head as though I was in a dream. It's actually inside Myanmar, on the border with Thailand, in an area called Karen State. It's a very remote, war-torn area. It's been war-torn for decades. And as long as I've known Karen State, when you look across from the Thai side of the border, it is just jungle and mountains and sometimes gunfire and artillery. So to see this shimmering, almost like a mirage of a city that just appeared, and it really did. It was built in less than 10 years. Sitting on the other side of the very narrow river that divides the two countries is extraordinary. It was built by a Chinese syndicate.
When you say syndicate, what do you mean exactly? A Chinese?
So think of organized crime, because that's what it is.
I see.
China is a massive country. It's always had on the southern coast of China well-known organized crime. But given the size of China and the fact that China enforces its laws very strictly indeed these days, it's quite hard to be an organized criminal there now. And in the last 10 years, we've seen huge numbers of Chinese wanting to make money through questionable methods coming into Southeast Asia. And the person who founded Shwekoku was one of these people. He started in the Philippines, where gambling is legalized, moved to Cambodia, where it really took off. It was online gambling that kind of evolved into scams. And then he decided to build this city.
When you say city, Jonathan, just to be clear, can you describe what you saw? It is a proper city.
It's shining tower blocks in the midst of this jungle and this war zone, these high-rise hotels, casinos. You just don't see that anywhere else in that region, not on the Thai side, not on the Myanmar side. There's no question that the only business model there, by the time we saw it, which is just over a year ago, was through illegal business. There's nothing, it's very hard to get to. You have to cross the border illegally. We had to be smuggled across in a boat. I think when they started building it, they'd already made money from other scams and from online gambling and a whole range of other dubious online businesses. And I think they genuinely thought that they could make a viable city there. One of the things you've got to remember about these syndicates is the younger people, and that's certainly true of Xu Zhijiang, the man who founded Shwekoku, are not that experienced. They're provincial Chinese. They've come from the small provincial towns. They're very ambitious, but they don't know a lot about the world. And the people I spoke to in Shwekoku genuinely thought they could turn their scam city into something bigger. They had entertainment parks, amusement parks. They had a go-kart track. Although there was no access at all there to flights, tourists, or anything like that. I mean, they talked to us and said, we want it to be like Las Vegas. And I said, but how's anyone even going to get here? So it was very unusual because actually there are dozens and dozens of what we call scam compounds in the same area on this other side of the river from Thailand. Most of them don't look like cities. Most of them look like industrial estates. They're much, much more low profile. The reason they put themselves there is on the Myanmar side, it's a complete lawless zone. There are competing armed groups, warlords, who need to make money and are very happy to let people do whatever they want so long as they get paid. But because it's so close to Thailand, they were able to access power and telecoms is important. If you're going to do online scamming, you need good internet. So when they started up, and this really escalated only in the last 5, 6, 7 years, that access was very important. But Shwe Koku was on a whole different scale. And I think the only reason they allowed us to go there was because the boss, this man called Shi Zhejiang, this young Chinese man, had actually, under Chinese pressure, he'd been arrested in Thailand and put into prison. And we realized when they brought us over there that they actually thought that perhaps Western media coverage might help to get him released. And we had to say to them, we really don't think it will, but that was their view. You wouldn't get into any of the other scam compounds.
And when you were there, did you go inside buildings? What did you see? And how was it clear to you that scamming is the primary business here?
They actually wouldn't allow us to go into any of the buildings. The people who built this city then said to us, oh, well, we're just landlords. It's private business. We can't go in there. Look, we already knew that scamming was going on there because we already had met people who'd come out of Shwe Koku, as had many other groups who were rescuing people. There was no question it was going on. And the other reason that we knew it was scams is you looked at the amount of power, and by the time we got there, the Thais had cut off power. They cut off telecoms. So they're all using Elon Musk's Starlink service. They're Starlink satellite dishes littered across the roofs.
Wow.
This part of Myanmar is completely cut off from the rest of Myanmar. It's a complete war zone. Your only access is Thailand, and the Thais have also cut it off too. So, it's only illicit businesses that can work there. And we've spoken to enough people who'd done scamming inside Shwe Koku to know that was the main business there.
Jonathan, it is an extraordinary scene to imagine, the city of Shwe Koku that you visited. And I want to understand better how these centers actually work. What is a scam compound?
It's very simply a place that provides the facilities you need to run organized online fraud on an industrial scale. So essentially, a Chinese syndicate will make an arrangement where they give them protection, they get access to utilities, and they build their compounds. And they then rent out to other syndicates quite often, who will come in and rent out the buildings, and they will then put out advertisements, often on Telegram, any other way they can get through to people, and the word of mouth passes all over the world, luring people in. But they are places built for other organized crime groups to come in and run scams, and they run them ruthlessly to make money, and they make masses of money. We're talking tens of billions of dollars a year.
Tens of billions of dollars. Wow. Jonathan, you've alluded to the fact that this is happening in Myanmar. And it seems like this opportunity to create a scam city is possible in Myanmar because it's particularly lawless, at least in that region of Myanmar that you visited. And I'd really like to get a better sense of the context here. Can you remind us what is happening in Southeast Asia that make it possible for criminal gangs to build these whole compounds and in some cases keep people hostage there to carry out these scams?
I think Myanmar's a special case because it's collapsed into a civil war since the military seized power in 2021 in a very unpopular coup and provoked a popular uprising, which has become an armed uprising. So the country's at war. But Karen State, where these scams have been established, these scam compounds, actually has been at war longer than that. It's desperately poor. It's got competing warlords. It's very easy for anyone who's got money to do deals with these warlords. But there are also extensive scam networks in Cambodia, which is notionally a properly governed country with a stable government. And there, it's also a very poor country. It's to do with collusion with the ruling elite in Cambodia. One party has run that country ever since the end of the Civil War in the 1990s. There's one strong man that dominates, a man called Hun Sen. He's got all these tycoons around him. It's very much like an organized mafia state as well, notionally law-abiding, but in practice, Cambodia also has tolerated huge amounts of scam activity.
You mentioned that it's a lucrative business. How lucrative are we talking about? You had said tens of billions of dollars. Say, what percentage of the GDP of Myanmar are these scams? Is it possible to quantify it in that way?
Well, people have tried. I mean, it's pretty difficult to quantify anything in Myanmar right now. There's so much chaos. But in Cambodia, which is a smaller economy than Myanmar, admittedly, some estimates put the scam economy at more than half of the entire national economy. These are informed estimates by good researchers. In Myanmar, it might be 20 or 30% of the economy. And Myanmar's enormous.
That's huge. Yeah.
It makes it hard to stamp out because very powerful people are making huge amounts of money out of it.
I mean, look, I get text messages, phone calls. I've tried to put my phone number on those do not disturb call lists. What types of scams are we talking about?
They've become increasingly sophisticated. They've moved on from the classic, this is a great investment opportunity, you can't miss it, to targeting vulnerable people, people who are lonely, people who are elderly, and building a relationship. And they have different teams, and we've talked to people involved in it. They have the chatting team, they have the romance team that builds a romance. So usually somebody, often an attractive young woman, will build up over quite a number of weeks a relationship on WhatsApp or other social media messaging apps with somebody, really sort of build a friendship, and then start talking about the amazing amounts of money they're making. And then they'll pass them on to the next team who will be saying, look, this is an incredible opportunity. You know, what's her name has passed you on to us. You know, they work on the relationship side, but they do more than that. In a recent scam compound in Cambodia that was taken over by the Thai army after their border war, they found mock-ups of police stations from around the world there. There was a Singapore police station, there was an Australian police station, and you've got people in perfect uniforms, and they will call up and basically say, you know, your entire identity's been compromised, your bank account's compromised, you're accused of money laundering, you are now in trouble, we're here to help. It'll just keep on evolving. They've been using, some of the people we've spoken to said they use AI to make them into completely different people. And AI is so good now, you can have a big burly South Asian man who comes across as a very pretty Southeast Asian woman to whoever's on the receiving end of that. It's endlessly inventive, and they will keep on coming up with more and more ways. So, you know, what we think of as the most obvious scams, you know, a message sort of telling you to click on a link, they understand that people are now wising up to that.
Scams are undoubtedly a global phenomenon, but who are the primary targets of these scam compounds? Who are they trying to fraud and deceive?
It's interesting looking at the people who work in the scam centers, because that tells you a lot about the victims. They pick people who've got language skills. So you get a lot of East Africans who can speak English well. You get a lot of South Asians who can speak English well. A lot of Chinese, quite a few Indonesians. It's a big country with a large population. I haven't heard of anyone speaking any of the European languages in these scam centers, which is interesting that they don't seem to see that as a target, or perhaps they're just not likely to find so many French or German speakers who are willing to travel across the world to work like that. But it is the English-speaking world, the Chinese-speaking world, primarily, that they're targeting.
So I feel like we have a better sense of what's happening inside these scam compounds and who is operating them. You mentioned these sort of Chinese organized crime gangs often behind many of these scam compounds. But I'd like to get a better sense now of who is working in these compounds.
Well, they come from all over the world, and it's striking that the business has grown, particularly since the pandemic. Now, that to some degree cut off the people who used to go to the casinos, which are usually the fronts. In some places, you've got casinos fronting for the scam centers, and it kind of, I think the business really took off then. But also, the pandemic left huge numbers of people in Africa and Asia no longer able to get work, young people in particular, desperately looking for jobs. And they see these offers.
When you say offers, there's advertisements? Like,
Oh, yes.
Do
Yeah,
these scam compounds advertise in newspapers, or how do they find these people?
Not in newspapers, but you'll get them on social media, on Facebook, a lot of Facebook pages, certainly on messaging apps. And word gets passed around as well. A lot of the people we've spoken to were hired after recommendations from people they thought were friends. And that's why they trusted them. And they'll often say the job's in Thailand, which is an attractive place. Most people feel it's a good place to go. They will have tickets booked for them. They will arrive in Bangkok, and then they get taken in a car. They don't know where they're going. And going into Myanmar, they won't even know when they've crossed the border, because they'll go across an illicit route. By that stage, coercion usually starts. Their passports will have been taken away. They're mostly young, mostly people desperately in need of work, who tried many times to get jobs. And with a lot of Ethiopians, a lot of South Asians, Bangladeshi, Pakistani men who might have gone to the Gulf, for example, and really struggled to get a job in somewhere like Dubai or Qatar. These seemed like golden opportunities to them.
And what job do they think they're getting?
They always think it's going to be telephone work, sales work, basic computer work. That's what they think they're going to be doing.
And so they're coerced, you say, in many cases, across the Thai-Myanmar border. And then what happens?
Well, then you are inside the scam compounds that have armed guards in Myanmar, especially because it's these armed insurgent groups who are actually enabling the scam centers by guarding them on the outside, and you will have guards on the inside too, who enforce the routines and discipline. They run a very, very harsh ship. You don't step out of line. They told us when they arrive, they're usually very exhausted. They're allowed to sleep that night, but they say the next morning you're going to have to work. And when they go in, they're usually presented with a contract that says you have to work for us for maybe 18 months or 2 years. And if they don't want to sign the contract, that's when they'll get beaten or given electric shocks, and warned that things will get much worse if they don't. And they're also told they've got targets they've got to hit, how many hours they're going to have to work a day. You take your meals at specific times. You often work 15, 16 hours a day. It's a very, very harsh routine. There's the famous case of the Chinese actor, which sparked off a real crackdown under Chinese pressure at the beginning of last year, because he came to Thailand thinking he was on a production shoot. He was a bit short of work. Somebody said, there's a film shoot. We'd like you to take part in it. He had no idea that he'd be going into Myanmar. But other people have some idea what they're going into, but then when they get there...
So a Chinese actor ended up in one of these scam compounds.
That was a particularly celebrated case because he was reasonably well known. And once he disappeared and his friends had known what he was doing...
People were wondering what happened. Yeah.
Well, more than that, they kicked up a huge social media fuss. And the Chinese government was embarrassed because they'd already shut down the scam centers on the Myanmar-Chinese border very effectively. And they told their population, we've got it under control. And suddenly a reasonably well-known actor finds himself caught on the Thai-Myanmar border. So it escalated the pressure to do something about the scams. And the Thai government certainly felt enormous pressure to do something because he'd come through Thailand to get there. But that was, his was an unusual case because he was well known. There was a very big social media campaign in China to get him freed. Most of the people who go in, of course, are anonymous. They've got one or two family members. I mean, I still get the messages pretty much all the time from people all over Southeast Asia saying, I've got a friend, I've got a relative who's trapped in this compound or that compound. They're being beaten, they can't get out. It doesn't stop. And it's much harder to get any action for those people because they're not well known.
I see.
We met one young Bangladeshi man, and his was an interesting story because he'd escaped, but he'd come back to the border on the Thai side to try to get his friends out. And some of the scam centers were being shut down, and hundreds of the workers were stranded on the other side, on the Myanmar side, but unable to go back to their own countries because they came from so many different countries. They didn't have any money. No one was organizing flights for them. It was a very chaotic situation. And his case was interesting because he told me that he'd actually been rather good at scamming. And he described his feelings about it. He said, I got so good at it. He said, I was masquerading as a young woman, even though he was clearly a young man. And
through AI.
Through AI, they put a different image up on the screen for the people receiving his calls. They changed his voice. And he said the turning point for him came when he'd become very friendly with this older Middle Eastern man in the Gulf. And he got this man to part with huge amounts of his savings. But this man was so beguiled by him and by his promises of getting rich that he told him he was going to sell his wife's jewelry to hand more money over. And this young Bangladeshi man said to me at that point, I felt really bad. But he said, I couldn't tell him. I couldn't warn him because we're being supervised the whole time. I knew if I tried to warn him, I'd be beaten or worse. But he said, after that, I was determined to get away. And because he was a very good worker, he was asked to escort one of the workers they'd beaten up very badly to a hospital that was very, very close to the river that divides Thailand and Myanmar. And after he dropped this person off, he sneaked across the river and had a very hair-raising journey. But finally, he was rescued by Thai soldiers. And because he persuaded them he was a victim of trafficking, they processed him and he was allowed to leave. But he'd come back to Thailand because he said, I left friends in this place. It was a particularly notorious, very new compound. They only started building it, called Hexing. And when we left him, he was still trying to get his friends out. He did manage to get them out. There were a lot of people being brought over.
He did manage to get them out.
He managed. It took him a while. It took him a couple of months. But finally, he was reunited with his friends and got them back. And I presume, I haven't heard from him lately, that they've gone back to Bangladesh.
How unusual is Aryan's story? How common is it for people to be able to escape from one of these scam compounds?
A lot of people do, but it can be a really hairy experience, and it's very risky. I mean, we know of another young man we spoke to, and he tried to escape, I think, about 3 or 4 times. One time when he escaped to the Thai side, the Thai immigration officials sold him back to the traffickers. They made money out of him. So even when he got to the Thai side, he wasn't safe. He did eventually get out, and he disappeared. We don't know whether he was taken to China because he knew a lot about the scam centers, and we think the Chinese authorities would have wanted him, or whether he would have gone back to Malaysia where he came from. But other people who can't get out do get desperate, and we know of a number of cases of people who've committed suicide because
wow.
they were in such despair. I mean, it can be an absolutely grueling and appalling experience. I mean, it's completely inhuman in that the gangs running these scam compounds are simply out to make money, and people are a commodity. You're only as good as the money you're making for them, and if you can't do it, then you're expendable. And the people who are not good at it or can't bear the conditions or want to get out often suffer terribly, and many of them don't get out.
We've discussed the situation of workers as a situation of human trafficking, right? Of forced labor. But I'm also wondering, Jonathan, are there people working in these scam compounds who have come to this life of crime of their own volition, who just think it's a good way to make money?
Unquestionably, there's all different kinds of people there. I mean, it was interesting that a couple of months ago we were on the border, and one of the very new scam compounds had been taken over by one of the rebel groups in Karen State that's against scams, and they wanted to showcase to the outside world, they're looking for Western support. We're against scams, so they invaded this scam center, took it over, and started booting the scam workers out and sending them across into Thailand. But several hundred of the Chinese scam workers there didn't want to leave. Now, I don't know if they were trafficked or not, but what happens to the Chinese is when they get out, China treats them as criminals. And we've seen it. China charters planes to bring them back. And they arrive in Thailand, they are zip-tied, their hands zipped together with policemen on either side, taken back, and they're often put on trial back in China. If they're thought to be involved in organizing the scams, they face extremely severe punishment, including death. A number of scam bosses have been executed by China recently. So in this scam compound, the Chinese who were there didn't want to go back to Thailand. And these Karen rebels who'd taken it over said, come on, we'll go back to Thailand. You can go back to China. They said, we don't want to go back to China. We want to go to another scam compound. There are plenty of people doing it willingly who've got good at it and who've adjusted to the lifestyle there.
I'm struck by the fact that you're describing a really sophisticated ecosystem. And that makes me wonder, how do you actually root out this problem? You've mentioned that at one point the Thai cut off the power, right, to some of these scam compounds. So what is being done to combat this, and how effective have any of those efforts been?
I mean, at a local level, the government in Myanmar, it's a military government that is trying to make itself respectable now, is putting a very impressive show of demolishing scam compounds. But that's just the most visible infrastructure. In Cambodia, we're seeing the government there. The top levels of the Cambodian government, the ruling family, have close ties to Cambodian tycoons who are deeply implicated in scams. They've been making money out of it, but they're now claiming, oh, we didn't know about it. They're closing down some of the scam centers. They're bringing journalists. They're showing it off. This is really quite superficial stuff. The key thing to remember about scam compounds and scamming is money. They have to clean their money. They have to launder their money. And an adjunct to these visible scam centers has been huge illegal money flows, particularly using cryptocurrencies to launder the money out. We're now seeing international pressure. If you've got the United States engaged, which it is now because so many American citizens are victims of these scams and are losing their savings, but you've also got the Chinese government. Hundreds of thousands of their citizens have either been scammed or have been lured into these horrific work camps to do the scamming. That double pressure is starting to show, particularly in Cambodia, where the government, I think, is very, very worried about pressure from both these superpowers.
But it sounds like people in power are also benefiting in some cases.
They have been.
I mean, right?
Yeah.
And in Myanmar, there has been unrest for a long time. And you mentioned earlier that there's armed guards outside these compounds. So, I mean, are all sides in the Myanmar war profiting from this all?
Most sides are, yeah. Crucially, the Myanmar military has been in partnership with people involved in scams for a very long time. It's only now, under pressure from China. China has a lot of influence in Myanmar, that the Myanmar military government is starting to say, oh, we're going to do something about it.
I mean, that's wild if you think about it, Jonathan. It's like scams that are being sent halfway across the world to unknowing Americans are in some indirect way actually helping fund this conflict in Myanmar then.
And the government in Cambodia, which actually the Prime Minister's just been visiting the United States. They really want to improve relations. They're doing a trade deal with the US. I've no doubt behind the scenes US officials are saying to the Cambodians, you've got to do something. But the links to the scams and the scam money go right to the top in Cambodia. And everyone's watching now to see whether this current operation the Cambodians are making a big song and dance about to shut down scam centers, whether they're serious about it or not. The problem for this ruling elite is that's a big source of their money. It's how they buy off their allies. If they don't have that source of money, it actually could lead to political instability. It certainly goes a very, very long way, and it's going to be extremely difficult to eradicate.
Jonathan, you've described an environment in which, as many law enforcement efforts as there may be to try to whack out some of these scam compounds, it really seems rather impossible to effectively do this because you say regional law enforcement in Southeast Asia is weak. And we're living in a global economic environment in which there will continue, and there are continuously young people in parts of Africa, parts of South Asia who are lured into this. And so that makes me wonder, well, what's the future of this business? Is there really a way to end this business model?
I don't think so, but then we've always had scams, haven't we? I mean, this is just, it's a very contemporary evolution of the scams that we've known for generations. I don't think you're ever going to stop it. I mean, what's changed is globalization, the ease of travel. I mean, it's amazing to meet people from 30 or 40 different countries who found a way to get there. 20 or 30 years ago, they'd never have dreamt of that because they wouldn't have heard about it, the telecoms wouldn't have been good enough, and they couldn't have got there. So you've got a combination of easy travel, lots of huge amounts of young unemployment, and then you've got on top of that the social media revolution, the digital revolution that can put this stuff out there, and the communications revolution that allows these sophisticated scams to operate on this massive scale. And then of course you've got digital money, crypto, easy ways to filter the money out, clean it up, move it into legitimate sources. It's scams are not new, but the scale and sophistication of them and the constant changing of them through the technology that's available now, that is new.
Well, thank you so much, Jonathan, for bringing your reporting and your expertise to us. I really appreciate it.
It was great to talk to you.
That was BBC's Southeast Asia correspondent Jonathan Head talking to my co-host Asma Khalid. And that's it for this episode of The Global Story on YouTube. We're also a podcast. We're available 5 days a week on bbc.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Cheerio. See you next time.